7 years. 2,555 days. Ilara counted them not in triumph, but in the quiet, methodical way one might count the bars of a gilded cage. Tonight marked the anniversary. Not of a marriage, but of a treaty signed in silk and gold, sealed with vows that had turned to frost on the Alpha Queen's lips the moment they were spoken. Her rooms were in the quietest wing of the stone fortress, a courtesy that had felt like a kindness in the first year and a banishment by the third. From her window, she could see the northern battlements, sharp and black against a sky bruised with twilight. The air that slipped through the leaded glass was cold, carrying the scent of pine and the coming snow. It was Lyra's scent. The scent of her wife, the Alpha Queen, a woman she shared a name and a castle with, but not a life. Dignity was the armor she had forged in the silence of those years. It was polished with routine, with serene smiles in the great hall, with a placid interest in the tapestries and the gardens. It was a heavy, flawless thing that protected the soft, vulnerable creature beneath. Her heart, that foolish, stubborn organ that still, after all this time, beat a little faster when the Queen's silver-blonde head turned in her direction. She hated it for its hope. Hope was a crack in the armor, a weakness an enemy could exploit. And in this cold, silent war of attrition, hope was the most dangerous enemy of all. She traced the rim of her untouched wineglass. The fire crackled, a lonely companion. Down below, in the heart of the keep, there would be a feast. Lyra would be presiding, a vision of power in dark furs and silver, her presence a weight that settled over the entire court. She would be magnificent. She would be untouchable. And she would not notice Ilara's absence. It had been 4 years since Ilara had last attended an anniversary feast. The first 3 had been an exercise in exquisite torture, watching her wife command the loyalty and admiration of everyone except the one person bound to her by law and sacred right. After the 3rd, she had pleaded a headache. No one had questioned it. No one had noticed the lie or the truth behind it. The Queen's consort was a ghost in her own home, and ghosts were not expected to have an appetite. Her wolf, the spirit bound to her soul, was a quiet thing now, curled tight in on itself. It remembered the pull of the mate bond from that first day, a call that had been met with a wall of ice. It had learned not to answer. A single log shifted in the hearth, sending a shower of sparks up the flue. 7 years. A lifetime. She lifted the glass, the deep red liquid shimmering like a captured jewel. A toast to the silence. To the strength found in solitude. To the armor that had not yet failed her. She drank, and the wine was as bitter and cold as the truth. The summons was a surprise. A young page, breathless and wide-eyed, had appeared at her door 3 days later, bearing a formal request from the Queen's chamberlain. Her presence was required at the evening meal with the visiting delegates from the Sunstone clans. It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in courtesy. To refuse would be a political slight, an insult not just to Lyra but to their guests. The armor had to be donned. Ilara chose a gown of deep sapphire, a color that did not wash out her pale skin, but instead gave it the luminescence of moonlight on water. Her dark hair was coiled in an intricate knot at the nape of her neck. Simple, elegant, unassailable. She was a portrait of quiet grace, a queen's consort who understood her role, to be beautiful, silent, and ornamental. The great hall was a cacophony of noise and light, the scent of roasted meat and mulled wine thick in the air. Ilara moved through it with a practiced ease, her smile a pale, lovely mask. She took her seat to the left of the dais, a position of honor that felt like a pillory. And there, at the head of the table, was Lyra. The Alpha Queen was deep in conversation with the Sunstone chieftain, her head inclined, a faint, serious smile on her lips. Lamplight caught in her silver-white braid, turning it to spun moonlight. She was, as always, breathtaking. A visceral ache bloomed in Ilara's chest, sharp and familiar. It was the pain of wanting something you could see and breathe and almost touch, but could never have. Her wolf stirred, a low whine in the back of her mind, drawn to the sheer power and presence of its alpha, its mate. Hush, Ilara commanded it, her hands tightening in her lap. Be still. She focused on her plate, on the intricate patterns of the silverware, on the way the candlelight danced on the surface of her water goblet. She would endure this. She had endured worse. She had endured wedding nights colder than a winter tomb and years of passing her wife in the hall with no more than a curt nod. This was nothing. Then it happened. In a lull in the conversation, Lyra looked up. Her gaze swept the hall, a ruler surveying her domain. And it stopped. On Alara. It was not the usual fleeting, dismissive glance. It was longer. A full second. 2. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held Alara's. There was no warmth in them, not yet, but the chilling indifference was gone. In its place was something else. A flicker of an emotion too complex and fleeting to name. It was like seeing a crack in a glacier, a hint of the immense, shifting weight beneath the surface. Alara's heart forgot its rhythm. It hammered once, hard, a desperate prisoner rattling the bars of her ribs. The breath caught in her throat. Hope, that treacherous viper, uncoiled in her stomach. And just as quickly, Lyra's attention was reclaimed by the chieftain. The moment was gone. It was nothing, Alara told herself, her nails digging into her palms. A stray glance. She was ensuring her political asset was behaving. Nothing more. She repeated the words like a catechism, a prayer to the god of self-preservation. But the warmth of that gaze lingered on her skin, a phantom touch that threatened to melt 7 years of carefully constructed ice. The viper of hope had struck, and she could already feel the poison spreading through her veins. The library had always been her sanctuary. Its silence was a comfort, not a condemnation. The scent of old paper and leather was a balm to her frayed senses. Here, she was not the ignored consort. She was merely a reader, a seeker of stories that were not her own. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, the worn leather cool beneath her touch. She was searching for a history of the old kingdoms, anything to distract from the memory of that look, from the low, insistent hum of the mate bond that had been reawakened and now refused to fall silent. The heavy oak door creaked open. Alara didn't look up, assuming it was a scribe or a scholar. But the air changed. The quiet, dusty peace was charged with a sudden, electric tension. The scent of pine and winter filled the space, sharp and clean and utterly overwhelming. Her wolf rose to its feet within her, hackles raised not in aggression, but in pure, instinctual awareness. She turned slowly. Lyra stood just inside the doorway, cloaked in shadows thrown by the high, arched windows. She was not in her formal queenly attire, but in simple black leggings and a tunic, the kind she wore when training. It made her seem less like a monarch and more like the wolf she was, a predator, sleek and powerful. She held no book, had made no move toward the shelves. Her presence here had no logical purpose. "Your Majesty," Alara murmured, her voice a little breathless. She gave a slight, respectful inclination of her head, her armor clicking firmly back into place. Lyra did not respond immediately. She just watched, her gray eyes intense, analytical. The silence stretched, thin and fragile, threatening to snap. Alara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against the wall of her chest. Why is she here? What does she want? She forced herself to turn back to the bookshelf, pretending an interest in a title she couldn't even read, the words blurring before her eyes. Her every nerve ending was screamingly aware of the Alpha Queen behind her. She could feel the heat of her, the sheer force of her will. "I was not aware you were an expert on pre-unification history." Lyra's voice was low, a rough velvet that scraped along Alara's spine. Alara stiffened. She did not turn. "I am merely a student, Your Majesty." "There is much to learn." Her own voice was clipped, formal. "Safe." Another long pause. Alara could hear the soft sound of Lyra's boots on the stone floor as she took a step, then another, into the room. Closer. The scent of pine was suffocating now. It was in her lungs, on her skin, a phantom embrace that made her ache. The wolf inside her wanted to turn, to submit, to press its face into the scent of its mate. Alara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Indeed," Lyra said, her voice now directly behind Alara. So close. Alara could feel the warmth radiating from her body. If she leaned back by a mere inch, she would be touching her. There is much to learn. The words were simple, but the tone was freighted with unspoken meaning. This was a test. A new move in a game whose rules Alara no longer understood. For 7 years, the rule had been distance. Avoidance. Now, Lyra was deliberately, methodically closing that distance. Alara's armor, her beautiful, reliable armor, felt as thin as glass. One wrong move, one word, and it would shatter, leaving her utterly exposed. She stared at the golden letters on the book spine, praying for a strength she no longer felt she possessed. That night, sleep offered no escape. Her mind, agitated and raw, threw her back in time, back to the cold, cavernous bedchamber of their wedding night. She remembered the feel of the silk sheets, impossibly fine and chillingly cold against her skin. She had waited, her heart aflutter with the nervous hope of a young bride, mated to the most powerful alpha in the 5 kingdoms. Lyra had entered the room hours later, still in her ceremonial armor, the silver inlay gleaming in the moonlight. She had not looked at Alara, not really. Her gaze was fixed on the hearth, on the dying flames. "This is a political necessity," Lyra had said, her voice devoid of all emotion. The words were not cruel, but their finality was a blade. "Our packs are united. The border skirmishes will end. That is the purpose of this union." Alara had sat up, clutching the sheets. "I understand my duty." "I am not sure that you do." Lyra had turned then, and her stormy eyes were filled with a weariness that went bone deep. "I am Alpha Queen first. My people, this kingdom, they're my mate. They require all of my strength, all of my focus. A bond, a true bond, is a vulnerability I cannot afford. It is a weakness my enemies would tear apart to get to me." She had finally looked at Alara, a flicker of something that might have been regret in her gaze. "I cannot give you what a mate deserves. I will not. To do so would be to endanger everything I have sworn to protect." She had then unbuckled her armor, piece by piece, the metallic sounds echoing in the crushing silence. She had not joined Alara in the bed. She had taken a pile of furs and lain before the cold hearth, her back to her new wife. A queen protecting her kingdom by building a wall around her own heart. The memory was as sharp and painful now as it had been then. It was the foundation of Alara's armor, the bedrock of her resignation. Lyra had chosen duty over desire, kingdom over mate. It was a noble sacrifice, perhaps, but it had left Alara a casualty of a war she hadn't even known she was fighting. She clung to that memory now, wrapping the old pain around her like a shield. The lingering glance in the great hall, the charged silence in the library, they were anomalies, dangerous and deceptive. Lyra had made her choice 7 years ago. A queen did not change her mind. To hope she had was to invite that first, devastating agony all over again. It was a poison she had sworn never to drink twice. A week passed in a state of suspended tension. Alara felt as if she were walking on a frozen lake, listening for the first crack of the ice beneath her feet. She saw Lyra more frequently than she had in the past 5 years combined. A nod in a corridor. A shared moment of silence at the breakfast table before the court descended. Each encounter was brief, formal, yet underscored by that same unsettling intensity in the queen's gaze. Restless, Alara sought the solace of the winter gardens. The air was crisp, the last of the autumn roses encased in a delicate filigree of morning frost. She pulled her cloak tighter, the quiet beauty of the dormant world a reflection of her own carefully contained heart. From the stone terrace, she had a clear view of the training grounds. And there was Lyra. She was sparring with her first warrior, Kale, a wolf of immense size and skill. But Lyra was faster, a blur of controlled violence. She moved with a liquid grace that was utterly lethal. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She was power incarnate, the alpha wolf in her element. Watching her was like watching a storm, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to look away from. The bond inside Alara thrummed, a deep, resonant chord of pure admiration and primal longing. This was her mate. Her queen. Kale lunged, a feint to the left before a powerful swing from the right. Lyra sidestepped, the wooden practice sword whistling past her ear. In the same fluid motion, she pivoted, using his momentum against him, and the flat of her blade connected solidly with his back. He grunted, stumbling forward. A clean, undeniable victory. But as she straightened, her chest rising and falling with exertion, Lyra's head came up. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the battlements, the windows, the terraces. They found Alara. And she faltered. For the first time since Alara had known her, the Alpha Queen's perfect control wavered. Her shoulders lost their rigid line, her grip on her sword seemed to loosen. The look on her face was not one of a queen or a warrior. It was stripped bare of all artifice. It was raw, unguarded longing. A desperate, aching hunger that mirrored the secret, shaming wound in Alara's own soul. It was a look that said, "I see you. And I am starving." The impact was so profound it stole the air from Alara's lungs. A gasp escaped her lips. This was not a stray glance. This was not a political calculation. This was a truth, exposed for a fleeting, terrifying moment in the cold morning light. Before Lyra could school her features, before Chaol could turn to see what had so distracted his queen, Alara fled. She turned and retreated into the shadows of the castle, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frantic bird. The ice was cracking. It was cracking all around her, and she was terrified of the cold, dark water that lay beneath. "You are pale." Alara looked up from her embroidery, her needle poised mid-stitch. Anya, her lady-in-waiting and the closest thing she had to a friend, was watching her with concerned eyes. "The winter air is sharp," Alara offered, a weak excuse. Anya set aside her own mending and moved to sit on the footstool beside Alara's chair. She had been with Alara since the beginning, a silent witness to the long, lonely years. "It is not the air, my lady. It is the queen." Alara's hand trembled, and she pricked her finger. A perfect, crimson bead welled on the tip. She stared at it, mesmerized. "I don't know what you mean. Do not play the fool with me, Alara." Anya's voice was gentle but firm. "Not after all this time. She has been watching you." Alara put her wounded finger to her lips, the coppery taste of blood on her tongue. "She is the queen. She watches everyone. She is ensuring the stability of her alliance." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. They were the worn, smooth stones of a defense she had used for years. "No," Anya insisted, leaning forward. 7 years I have watched her watch you." It was always the glance of a jailer checking on a prisoner. Distant. Cold. Obligatory. But this past week, something has changed. Anya's eyes were full of a cautious hope on Alara's behalf. "The way she looks at you now, it is the look of a wolf who has just realized what it has lost. There is hunger in it. And regret." Alara shook her head, a violent, desperate motion. "You are imagining things. You see what you wish to see. And you," Anya countered softly, "refuse to see what is right in front of you, because you are terrified it might be real. You have worn your pain like a shield for so long, you have forgotten how to set it down." The words struck home, a painful, resonant truth. Had her armor become her prison? Was she so afraid of being hurt again that she would deny herself the slightest chance of being healed? The single drop of blood on her fingertip seemed to grow, to swell, a symbol of the wound that had been reopened, the wound Anya was insisting might finally be tended to. She looked at her friend, at the honest sympathy in her face, and for the first time, a dangerous seed of doubt was planted in the barren ground of her resignation. What if Anya was right? What if everything was about to change? The thought was more terrifying than 7 more years of silence. That night, the castle felt different. The familiar shadows in the long, tapestry-lined corridors seemed deeper, the silence more profound. Alara walked back toward her chambers, a single candle her only guide, the flame dancing and throwing her silhouette into a distorted giant behind her. The air was still and cold. Too still. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Unhurried. Deliberate. The soft, confident tread of leather boots on ancient stone. They were behind her, matching her pace. She knew who it was without turning. She would know that presence anywhere. The scent that followed was a confirmation, a ghost of pine and winter snow clinging to the air, a storm at her back. Her heart leaped into her throat, a wild, panicked thing. Her wolf, dormant for so long, was now wide awake, pacing the confines of her soul, every instinct screaming with awareness of the Alpha approaching from behind. Walk faster, her mind commanded. Do not stop. Do not turn. Reach your rooms. Lock the door. Be safe. But her feet felt as though they were mired in honey. The footsteps grew closer. Louder. The scent intensified. She could almost feel the heat of a body, the sheer power, closing the distance between them. She reached her door, her hand trembling as she grasped the cold iron handle. Safety was an inch away. Alara. The sound of her name, spoken in that low, rough voice, shattered the silence. It was the first time in years Lyra had used it without a title, without the formal distance of the court. The name was an intimacy acclaim. Alara froze, her hand clamped on the handle, her back rigid. She could not breathe. She could not think. There was only the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears, and the presence of the woman standing a few feet behind her in the dark. A queen. A warrior. A wife. A stranger. Lyra did not move closer. She held her position, allowing the weight of that single word to settle in the space between them. The hallway was a cavern of shadows, and they were the only two souls in it. Alara willed herself to turn the handle, to escape into the sanctuary of her rooms, but her muscles would not obey. To flee now would be an act of cowardice, a blatant admission of how deeply this affected her. Her pride, the last remnant of her shattered armor, would not allow it. Slowly, deliberately, she let go of the door handle. But she did not turn. She would face this, but on her own terms, with the meager protection of not having to meet those stormy, unreadable eyes. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice strained, but steady. "I saw you," Lyra said, her voice soft, yet it carried down the stone corridor as if it were a shout. "In the gardens this morning." A statement of fact, not an accusation. Alara remained silent, her spine a rod of iron. "For 7 years," Lyra continued, and now there was a tremor in her voice, a crack in the granite facade that shocked Alara to her core. "For 7 years, I have told myself that duty was enough. That the strength of our kingdom was a worthy sacrifice for anything else." She paused, and Alara could hear her take a ragged breath. "I told myself it was a noble choice. To keep you at a distance. To treat you as a symbol, an alliance, and not as a mate. I believed it would keep me strong. I believed it would keep you safe." Alara's mind reeled. This confession, whispered in the dark, was rewriting the entire narrative of her suffering. It had not been a rejection of her, but a rejection of the bond itself. A fear of the very thing Alara had secretly craved. "Safe," Alara finally whispered, the word torn from her. "You call this life safe? I have been a ghost in my own home. A well-kept political prisoner. There are wounds a blade cannot make, Your Majesty." "I know." Lyra's voice was thick with a pain that mirrored her own. "I see that now. I see the armor you wear, and I know I am the one who forced you to forge it. And it was a fool's choice. A coward's." Finally, Alara turned. Lyra stood bathed in the flickering candlelight, and for the first time, Alara saw not the infallible Alpha Queen, but a woman haunted. The regret in her eyes was a vast, gray ocean. The 7 years of ice around Alara's heart began to groan, to crack under an impossible pressure. Why? The question was a broken thing, barely audible. After all this silence. Why no? Lyra took a single step forward, closing half the distance between them. The proximity was a physical blow, a jolt of pure energy that left Alara breathless. The air crackled. The scent of pine and winter was no longer a gentle reminder, it was a deluge, a storm breaking directly over her. "Because watching you live half a life beside me is a greater pain than any blade," Lyra said, her voice raw with emotion. "Because my wolf will no longer be denied its mate. It claws at the inside of my skin every time you are near. It howls in this damnable silence." Her gaze was searing, burning away the last of Alara's defenses. "And because I will no longer be denied." The Queen's legendary control finally shattered. The longing she'd seen on the training grounds was here, naked and overwhelming on her face. It was a mirror of the ache Alara had carried for 2,556 nights. The dam of her composure, so carefully maintained, crumbled to dust. Tears, the tears she had refused to shed for 7 years, welled in her eyes, blurring the image of her queen, her wife. The armor was gone. She was defenseless. Lyra raised a hand, her callous fingers trembling slightly. She did not touch her. Not yet. She held her hands suspended in the air between them, inches from Alara's cheek. It was not a command. It was a question. A plea for permission after years of taking nothing, of claiming nothing. It was an offering of choice to a woman who had been given none. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the bitter resignation of 7 years crested in a single, silent wave. Alara could have stepped back. She could have turned and fled into her room, locking the door on this impossible, terrifying hope. She could have rebuilt her walls, thicker and stronger than before. Instead, she leaned forward. She closed the final inch, pressing her cheek into Lyra's palm. The touch was fire and ice. The rough warmth of Lyra's skin against hers was an agony of relief. A sob caught in her throat. At the contact, the bond between them, so long suppressed and starved, flared to brilliant, blinding life. It was a supernova in the quiet hallway, a force of nature that swept through them both, erasing time, erasing the years of silence and pain. Lyra's other hand came to her waist, fingers digging into the fabric of her gown, pulling her flush against the hard lines of her body. There was no space left between them, no air, no doubt. Lyra lowered her head, and her kiss was not gentle. It was not tender. It was 7 years of starvation. It was the desperate, consuming hunger of the wolf. It was the regret of a queen and the raw need of a woman. It was a promise and an apology, a brutal, beautiful claiming in the shadows of the castle. And as Alara surrendered to it, as she wrapped her arms around her wife's neck and kissed her back with all the pent-up longing of her own broken heart, she knew that the silence was finally, irrevocably over.